On December 26, 1996, at exactly 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey's trembling hand dialed 911. Her voice cracked with panic as she screamed into the phone. Her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét, was gone, vanished from her bedroom. A ransom note lay on the kitchen stairs demanding exactly $118,000. Police raced to the upscale Boulder, Colorado mansion, arriving within 7 minutes. They searched every room, every closet, every corner. But it would take 8 more hours before the horrifying truth emerged. Because JonBenét wasn't kidnapped. She was already dead. Her body lay hidden in a cold, dark basement room in her own home. And the questions that arose from that discovery would haunt America for nearly 3 decades. This is the story of the JonBenét Ramsey case, a tragedy that transformed from a frantic kidnapping into one of the most controversial murder investigations in American history. A case where every piece of evidence seemed to contradict the next, where public opinion convicted a family that was never charged, where a father would spend 28 years proclaiming innocence while much of the world questioned his every word, his every action, his every tear. John Ramsey became one of the most scrutinized men in America, defending himself against accusations that destroyed his family, ruined his reputation, and left him fighting not just for justice, but for the truth itself. What really happened in that Boulder mansion on Christmas night 1996? Was it an intruder who committed an unspeakable crime and vanished into the night? Or was it something far more sinister, something that happened within the walls of a home that appeared perfect from the outside? And if John Ramsey was hiding something, anything, what was it? After 28 years, we're going to examine every detail, every contradiction, every theory, and every piece of evidence that has made this case an obsession for investigators, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts around the world. The Ramsey family represented the American dream. John Ramsey had built his fortune from the ground up. Born in Michigan, he served in the Navy, then earned his master's degree in business. He climbed the corporate ladder with determination and intelligence. By 1996, he was the founder and CEO of Access Graphics, a computer services company based in Boulder. That year, the company had just crossed $1 billion in revenue. John was wealthy, successful, respected in the business community. He lived in a 15-room Tudor-style mansion worth over $700,000 in one of Boulder's most exclusive neighborhoods, the University Hill area. His wife, Patsy, born Patricia Ann Paw in Parkersburg, West Virginia, had once worn the crown of Miss West Virginia in 1977. She was beautiful, poised, and deeply involved in her children's lives. She had graduated from West Virginia University with a degree in journalism. She met John in the early 1980s, and they married in 1980. Together they had 2 children, Burke, born in 1987, and JonBenét, born on August 6, 1990. John also had 3 children from his previous marriage, but they were adults and lived outside the home. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was named after her father, John, and her mother, Patsy, combining their names into something unique. From an early age, JonBenét was following in her mother's footsteps. She competed in child beauty pageants, winning title after title across Colorado and beyond. She had performed in pageants since she was 4 years old. Her blonde curls, bright smile, and stage presence were remarkable. Videos of her performances showed a child who seemed to love the spotlight, dancing, singing, posing with confidence that seemed beyond her 6 years. But these same videos would later fuel public controversy about whether child beauty pageants were appropriate, whether they sexualized young girls, whether they attracted the wrong kind of attention. Christmas Day, 1996, started like any other holiday for the Ramseys. The family opened presents in the morning. JonBenét received a bicycle. Burke got gifts he'd wanted. The house was decorated beautifully, lights twinkling, a Christmas tree standing near the front entrance. That evening, the Ramseys attended a party at the home of Fleet and Priscilla White, close friends who lived nearby. The gathering was festive, filled with food, conversation, and holiday cheer. JonBenét played with other children. She ate some pineapple, according to later forensic evidence found in her digestive system, though the Ramseys would say they didn't remember her eating pineapple that night. The family left the party around 9:30 p.m. JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car during the short drive home. John Ramsey carried his sleeping daughter inside, up the stairs, and placed her on her bed. Patsy later said she changed JonBenét into her pajamas without fully waking her. Burke, who was 9 years old, went to his bedroom. John and Patsy prepared for bed. According to their statements, everyone was asleep by 10 p.m. The house was quiet, locked, secure. The alarm system, however, was not activated that night. This detail would become significant. John later explained they rarely used the alarm system because it was complicated and often malfunctioned. The next morning, December 26th, Patsy Ramsey woke around 5:30 a.m. She got dressed, preparing to leave early for a flight to Michigan, where the family planned to spend a second Christmas with John's older children. As she walked down the spiral staircase from the bedroom level to the kitchen, she found something that made her blood turn cold. 3 sheets of paper lay on the wooden steps. She picked them up. They were a ransom note, handwritten, pages long, and they were addressed to John. The note began, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves." It went on to demand exactly $118,000 in cash, a number that seemed oddly specific. Investigators would later note this amount was almost exactly the same as John's recent bonus from Access Graphics, approximately $117,150. How would a stranger know that figure? The note instructed John to withdraw the money from the bank, place it in an adequately sized attaché case, and wait for a phone call between 8 and 10 a.m. the next morning with delivery instructions. But the note didn't stop there. It continued for 2.5 pages, an unusually long ransom note. Most ransom notes are brief, direct, functional. This one seemed theatrical, almost narrative. It included threats. "If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies." It mentioned the movie Dirty Harry and used phrases that seemed carefully constructed, perhaps overly so. The note ended with Victory, SBTC. The meaning of those initials has never been definitively explained. Patsy screamed. She ran to JonBenét's bedroom. The bed was empty. She then checked Burke's room. He appeared to be asleep. She ran downstairs screaming for John. She called 911 at 5:52 a.m. The dispatcher, Kim Archuleta, recorded the entire call. Patsy's voice was panicked, high-pitched, desperate. She said her daughter was missing and that she'd found a ransom note. The dispatcher asked if she'd read the whole note. Patsy said she'd only skimmed it. The dispatcher advised her not to touch anything and to wait for police. But after Patsy believed she'd hung up the phone, the 911 recording captured additional sounds and voices. Investigators would later analyze these sounds extensively, with some claiming they could hear Burke's voice asking what was going on, contradicting the Ramsey's statement that Burke remained asleep and unaware until later. Boulder police officer Rick French arrived at the Ramsey home at 5:59 a.m., just 7 minutes after the 911 call. He was met by a frantic Patsy and a calmer, more controlled John. Officer French read the ransom note. He began a systematic search of the house. He checked all 3 stories. He examined windows and doors for signs of forced entry. He found none. Every door was locked. Every window closed, except for one small basement window that was broken and slightly open. John Ramsey explained that window had been broken months earlier when he'd locked himself out of the house and had to crawl through it. He said he'd never bothered to repair it. Officer French continued to the basement. It was a confusing layout, with multiple rooms, storage areas, and a boiler room. He opened the door to a small room, the wine cellar, a windowless storage space. It was dark inside. He couldn't see much. He didn't enter fully. He closed the door and continued his search. This decision, this moment, would haunt Rick French for the rest of his life. Because JonBenét was already in that room, already dead, and he'd been within feet of her body. As morning progressed, more Boulder police officers arrived. Detectives Linda Arndt and Fred Patterson took over the investigation, but a critical mistake was made. The crime scene was not properly secured. John Ramsey made phone calls. He contacted his pilot to delay their flight. He called friends. Patsy called friends. Within an hour, the house was filling with people. Fleet White arrived along with his wife. John and Barbara Fernie came. A victim advocate sent by the police arrived. People walked through the house, sat on furniture, used bathrooms, touched surfaces. The potential crime scene was being contaminated by the minute. The ransom note said the kidnappers would call between 8 and 10 a.m. Detective Arndt set up recording equipment on the Ramseys' phone. John sat nearby, waiting. 8 o'clock came and went. 9 o'clock passed. 10 o'clock arrived with no phone call. The kidnappers, if they existed, were not calling. Detective Arndt later reported that John Ramsey seemed to become more agitated as the morning wore on. She noted his behavior in her reports, observations that would later fuel suspicion about his demeanor and reactions. Before we continue with what happened next, I need you to do something. Subscribe to True Crime Vault and hit that notification bell right now. We bring you in-depth investigations into real cases that shaped criminal history, cases that deserve to be remembered and examined with the detail and respect they deserve. New documentaries every single week covering unsolved mysteries, serial killers, and investigations that shocked the world. If you're already invested in the JonBenét Ramsey case, hit that like button. It helps this content reach more people who care about justice and truth. And drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe the Ramseys were involved? Or do you think an intruder committed this crime? Your theories matter. Now, let's continue with what happened that afternoon, the moment that changed everything. By 1 p.m., 6 hours had passed since the expected ransom call. Detective Arndt, feeling the need to do something, suggested that John Ramsey and Fleet White conduct another search of the house, just to see if they'd missed anything, just to be thorough. John agreed. The two men started in the basement. They checked the train room, a space where Burke's elaborate model train set was displayed. They checked the boiler room. Then, at approximately 1:05 p.m., John Ramsey opened the door to the wine cellar. This time, he turned on the light. And there, lying on the concrete floor, covered with a white blanket, was his daughter. John Ramsey's scream echoed through the entire house. It was primal, agonized. He rushed to JonBenét, ripped the duct tape off her mouth and picked her up. Fleet White, standing behind him, saw immediately that the child was dead. Her body was in full rigor mortis, cold and stiff, but John carried her upstairs anyway, taking the steps 2 at a time. He laid her on the floor in the front hallway, near the Christmas tree they decorated together just days before. Patsy saw her daughter's body and collapsed, draping herself over JonBenét, sobbing uncontrollably. Detective Arndt immediately knew the situation had spiraled beyond control. She was alone with multiple people in a house that was now a murder scene. She'd lost control of the scene hours ago, and now it was completely compromised. John had moved the body. People were everywhere. She called for backup and tried to secure the area, but the damage was done. Every protocol of crime scene investigation had been violated. The body had been moved, evidence had been touched, walked on, contaminated. It would make solving this case exponentially more difficult. The initial examination of JonBenét's body revealed horrifying details. She was wearing a white Gap shirt and white long underwear. Her hands were positioned above her head, with white cord loosely tied around her wrists. A similar cord was fashioned into a crude garrote around her neck, with a broken paintbrush handle used as a tightening device. The paintbrush, investigators later determined, came from Patsy Ramsey's art supplies in the basement. Duct tape covered her mouth. Her body showed signs of trauma, but no obvious signs of bleeding or struggle. The autopsy, performed the next day by Dr. John Meyer of the Boulder County Coroner's Office, provided more details but raised even more questions. JonBenét had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. In simpler terms, she'd been hit on the head with tremendous force, fracturing her skull, and she'd been strangled with the garrote. The medical examiner estimated she died sometime between 10 p.m. on December 25th and 2 a.m. on December 26th, which meant she was likely already dead or dying when Patsy found the ransom note at 5:30 a.m. The skull fracture was severe, an 8.5-inch linear fracture that suggested a blow from a heavy object, possibly a flashlight or bat. There was significant brain swelling. Yet remarkably, there was very little external bleeding, suggesting the strangulation occurred close to the time of the head injury. Some experts believed she was struck on the head first, rendering her unconscious, and then strangled. Others argued the sequence might have been reversed. The timeline and sequence of injuries would become a source of intense debate among forensic experts. The autopsy also noted some vaginal trauma, though the medical examiner's findings on this point were complex and controversial. There was evidence of chronic inflammation, but whether this indicated prior sexual abuse or was caused by other factors remained disputed. Some experts brought in by the Boulder police believed it indicated a history of abuse. Other experts hired by the Ramseys' attorneys disagreed strongly, attributing the findings to normal variations or improper wiping. This aspect of the case became one of the most contentious and disturbing elements, with profound implications depending on which interpretation was correct. There was also undigested pineapple in JonBenét's digestive system. This seemed like a minor detail, but it became significant. A bowl of pineapple was found on the kitchen table with a spoon in it. The bowl had Burke's fingerprints and Patsy's fingerprints on it, but both John and Patsy stated they didn't remember JonBenét eating pineapple after they returned home from the party. Burke, in his initial police interview, seemed uncertain about the pineapple. So when did JonBenét eat it? Who gave it to her? This small inconsistency became another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit the official narrative. Now let's talk about the ransom note in detail, because it became one of the most analyzed documents in criminal history. The note was written on a pad of lined paper found in the Ramsey home. The pen used to write it was also from the house. After writing the note, whoever wrote it placed the pen back where it belonged. The pad was found in its usual spot. This suggested the note was written inside the house, probably after the murder, not brought by an intruder. But why would a killer take the time to write a lengthy ransom note after murdering the child? Handwriting analysis became a major focus. Multiple experts examined the note. Their conclusions varied, which is not uncommon in handwriting analysis, a field that's more art than science. Some experts said Patsy Ramsey could not be ruled out as the author. They pointed to specific letter formations, the style of certain words, and the overall presentation. Other experts said the writing definitely did not match Patsy's known handwriting samples. John's handwriting was generally ruled out by most experts. The writing appeared to have feminine characteristics, they said, though that was not definitive. Linguistic analysis of the note revealed interesting patterns. The author used certain phrases that seemed educated, literary almost. References to foreign faction, adequate size attaché, Southern common sense. These weren't typical kidnapper language. The note also contained references to movies. The phrase, "Don't try to grow a brain," was nearly identical to a line from the film Speed. The reference to the film Dirty Harry was explicit. The tone shifted throughout the note, sometimes threatening and harsh, other times almost conversational. Some experts believe this indicated someone trying to disguise their writing and their voice, creating a fictional persona. The $118,000 demand remained puzzling. It was too specific to be random, yet too small to be a serious ransom for a wealthy family. If someone wanted to extort money from John Ramsey, why not demand $1 million? $2 million? Why a figure so close to his bonus? Only someone with intimate knowledge of the family's finances would know that number. An employee of Access Graphics, perhaps? Or someone in the family itself? Police immediately began investigating possible suspects outside the family. They looked at anyone who might have had access to the house or knowledge of the family. There was a housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh, who had worked for the Ramseys. She knew the layout of the house. She had financial troubles and had asked Patsy for a loan of exactly $2,000 just days before Christmas. Police questioned her extensively. She took a polygraph test and passed. Her handwriting didn't match the ransom note. Her husband's handwriting was also examined and ruled out. Despite suspicions, no evidence connected her to the crime. Then there was Bill McReynolds, a retired journalism professor who had played Santa Claus at the Ramseys' Christmas party in 1996 and the year before. He was beloved by the children, including JonBenét. But investigators learned that McReynolds' own daughter had been kidnapped decades earlier on December 26th, the same date as JonBenét's death. The daughter had been taken to a basement and sexually assaulted. The coincidence seemed too strange to ignore. Police investigated McReynolds thoroughly. His wife had written a play years earlier that involved a child being murdered in a basement. Was this just bizarre coincidence or something more? McReynolds submitted to questioning, provided handwriting samples, and was eventually cleared. He died in 2002, never charged, but forever linked to the case in true crime discussions. Another person of interest was Michael Helgoth, a local man with a criminal history who died by suicide in February 1997, just 2 months after JonBenét's murder. He owned a pair of high-tech boots, the same brand that left a partial print at the crime scene. He had made some odd statements about the Ramsey case to acquaintances. After his death, some investigators considered him a possible suspect. But his DNA didn't match the unknown DNA found on JonBenét, and the evidence connecting him to the crime was circumstantial at best. There was also John Mark Carr, a former schoolteacher who confessed to killing JonBenét in 2006. He was arrested in Thailand and extradited to Colorado. Media coverage was intense. Finally, some thought the case would be solved. But Carr's confession quickly fell apart. His DNA didn't match. He couldn't provide accurate details about the crime. Evidence showed he wasn't even in Colorado when JonBenét was killed. He was obsessed with the case, but he wasn't the killer. He was released without charges, and the investigation continued. Despite these leads, the Boulder Police Department focused primarily on the Ramsey family. This is standard investigative procedure. When a child is killed in their own home, statistically, family members are responsible in about 80% of cases. Detectives looked hard at John and Patsy. They examined their finances, their backgrounds, their marriage, their relationships with their children. They interviewed friends, employees, neighbors, anyone who knew them. Some people described the Ramseys as a perfect family, loving and close-knit. Others hinted at tension, pressure, perfectionism, especially regarding JonBenét's pageant career. The theory that emerged among some investigators was this: something happened in the house on Christmas night. Perhaps an accident, perhaps a moment of rage, perhaps something involving Burke, the 9-year-old brother. The theory suggested that one or both parents discovered JonBenét injured or dead and staged the scene to look like an intruder kidnapping and murder. They wrote the ransom note to misdirect police. They created the garrote. They placed the duct tape. They hid the body in the basement room, planning to discover it later after police left, perhaps to move it elsewhere. But police stayed longer than expected, and the plan fell apart, forcing John to find the body when Detective Arndt suggested another search. This theory had problems, significant problems. If you're trying to stage a kidnapping, why leave the body in the house? Why not actually remove it? And if it was an accident or a moment of rage, why the garrote, which suggested deliberate, prolonged strangulation? Why the duct tape? Why any of it? The staging theory required the parents to be simultaneously criminal masterminds and incredibly incompetent. It required them to write a lengthy ransom note calmly while their daughter lay dead or dying. It required them to create a complex scene in a few hours in the middle of the night. And it required them to maintain absolute consistency in their lies for nearly 3 decades, never slipping, never confessing, even to each other. But the theory persisted because of behavioral observations. Some detectives felt the Ramseys didn't act like grieving parents. John seemed too controlled. Patsy seemed overly dramatic. They hired lawyers immediately, which guilty people do. But innocent people facing false accusations also hire lawyers. The Ramseys initially cooperated with police, giving statements on December 26th, answering questions. But within days, as they realized they were being investigated as suspects, not victims, their attorneys advised them to limit cooperation. They eventually agreed to formal interviews months later, in April 1997, but under specific conditions. This was portrayed as uncooperative behavior, as hiding something. John and Patsy also made the unusual decision to hire a public relations team. They gave interviews to national media. They appeared on CNN. They went on television to proclaim their innocence. Most people in their situation would have hidden from the media, grieved privately, refused to engage. But the Ramseys did the opposite. They defended themselves publicly. Some saw this as evidence of innocence, a righteous refusal to accept false accusations. Others saw it as manipulative, an attempt to control the narrative, to sway public opinion before a trial could occur. One of the most controversial interviews was on CNN on January 1st, 1997, just 6 days after JonBenét's death. John and Patsy sat together, holding hands, as Patsy read a statement. She looked directly into the camera and said, "There is a killer on the loose. I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a he or a she. But if I were a resident of Boulder, I would tell my friends to keep their babies close to you." This statement was seen by some as a mother's genuine warning. Others saw it as deflection, an attempt to shift focus away from the family. Patsy took a polygraph test in May 1997, administered by an examiner hired by their attorneys. She passed, according to the Ramseys team. But police considered this test unreliable because it wasn't conducted independently. John also took polygraph tests years later and claimed he passed. But polygraphs are controversial, not admissible in most courts, and can be beaten or misinterpreted. They proved nothing definitively. As 1997 turned into 1998, the investigation stalled. The Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office were increasingly at odds. Police wanted to move forward with charges against the Ramseys. DA Alex Hunter was more cautious, aware that the evidence was circumstantial and that a high-profile trial could fail spectacularly. Hunter made a controversial decision. He brought in a grand jury. A grand jury is a group of citizens who hear evidence in secret and decide whether there's probable cause to indict someone for a crime. It's not a trial. It doesn't determine guilt or innocence. It only determines whether there's enough evidence to charge someone. The grand jury convened in September 1998. It met for over a year, hearing testimony from dozens of witnesses, reviewing thousands of pages of documents, examining forensic evidence, listening to experts. In October 1999, the grand jury voted. But DA Alex Hunter shocked everyone when he held a press conference on October 13, 1999, and announced he would not sign an indictment. He said there was insufficient evidence to file charges against anyone. He thanked the grand jury for their work and sent them home. The case, he implied, was at a dead end. But that wasn't the whole truth. In 2013, 14 years later, documents were unsealed that revealed what actually happened. The grand jury had voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey, not for murder directly, but on charges of child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. The indictment stated that the Ramseys did unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenét Ramsey. It also stated they did render assistance to a person with intent to hinder, delay, and prevent the discovery, detention, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such person for the commission of a crime. These were vague charges, suggesting the grand jury believed something criminal happened involving the Ramseys but couldn't determine exactly what. The wording suggested the jury thought the parents either caused JonBenét's death through neglect or abuse, or they helped someone else cover up the crime. But DA Hunter refused to sign the indictments. Without his signature, they were meaningless. Hunter later explained he didn't believe he could prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt in court, the standard required for conviction. He felt the evidence, while suspicious, was not conclusive. He made the call not to prosecute. It was a decision that enraged many investigators and left the public confused and frustrated. What do you think happened? Do you believe the grand jury was right to indict, or was the DA correct to refuse? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Was this a family tragedy covered up, or a rush to judgment against innocent parents? Your theories help keep this conversation alive, and these cases deserve to be discussed with honesty and respect. Throughout all of this, one person remained almost invisible: Burke Ramsey. He was 9 years old on the night his sister died. He was interviewed by police and a child psychologist in the days after the murder. In his interviews, Burke seemed calm, even detached. He said he was asleep. He heard nothing. He knew nothing. Some psychologists said this was normal for a child dealing with trauma through avoidance. Others found his demeanor unusual. Theories began to emerge, disturbing theories that suggested Burke might have been involved accidentally or otherwise, and that his parents covered it up to protect him. This theory gained traction in certain circles. It suggested that Burke, jealous or angry, might have struck JonBenét with something, perhaps the flashlight found on the kitchen counter. The blow fractured her skull. The parents discovered her injured or dying. Rather than call 911 and risk Burke being taken away, investigated, or institutionalized, they made a terrible decision. They staged the scene. They created the garrote to obscure the real cause of death. They wrote the ransom note. They hid the body, all to protect their son. This theory explained some inconsistencies, like the ransom note written in the house, the lack of forced entry, the family's defensive behavior. But this theory also had problems. It required parents to strangle their unconscious daughter to death rather than try to save her. It required them to sexually assault her with an object, which the autopsy suggested might have occurred. It required them to maintain a horrific secret for decades. And it required Burke, as a child and later as an adult, to live with that secret without ever breaking. Burke was extensively interviewed by investigators multiple times over the years. He consistently maintained he knew nothing. His DNA was tested. It didn't match the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét. Burke Ramsey lived most of his life out of the public eye. He graduated from college, he worked in a technical field, he avoided media. But in 2016, CBS aired a documentary called The Case of JonBenét Ramsey that strongly suggested Burke was involved in his sister's death. The documentary featured investigators and experts who laid out the theory step by step. Burke sued CBS for $750 million for defamation. The case was settled in 2019 for an undisclosed amount. Burke also sued a forensic pathologist who had made similar claims. That case was also settled. In September 2016, Burke did something unusual. He gave his first public interview to Dr. Phil McGraw. Over 3 episodes, Burke discussed the case, his memories of that night, and the impact of decades of suspicion. He appeared awkward, smiled at inappropriate times, and gave answers that many viewers found strange. Some saw this as evidence of guilt or psychological damage. Others saw it as a socially awkward man thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight, dealing with trauma in his own way. Burke maintained his innocence. He said he had nothing to do with his sister's death. He said he was asleep. He woke up to chaos. His life was destroyed by accusations. He wanted people to know the truth. An intruder killed JonBenét. And then there's the DNA evidence. This is perhaps the most critical element of the entire case. The evidence that some believe proves an intruder theory and others believe is misleading or contaminated. When JonBenét's body was examined, forensic scientists found DNA evidence that didn't match anyone in the Ramsey family. Specifically, there was male DNA found in the crotch area of JonBenét's underwear. It was a mixture, but it contained a male profile that was entered into the FBI's CODIS database. This profile didn't match John Ramsey. It didn't match Burke. It didn't match any known suspect. It didn't match anyone in the database. An unknown male had left genetic material on the underwear of a murdered 6-year-old girl. In 2003, the Boulder Technology Group, a private lab, was able to develop a more complete profile from this DNA using newer techniques. In 2008, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation used a cutting-edge method called touch DNA analysis. They tested the long underwear JonBenét was wearing when she was found. They found touch DNA that matched the unknown male profile from the underwear. This was significant. It suggested the same unknown male had touched both pieces of clothing, making innocent transfer less likely. On July 9, 2008, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey did something extraordinary. She wrote a letter to John Ramsey officially apologizing to him and his family. She stated that new DNA evidence had convinced her office that the Ramseys were not involved in JonBenét's murder. She said the DNA pointed to an unknown male intruder, and that the investigation should focus on finding that person. She formally exonerated the Ramsey family. For John, Patsy, and Burke, it was a vindication they'd sought for nearly 12 years. But for Patsy, it came too late. She had died of ovarian cancer in 2006, never seeing her name cleared publicly. But not everyone accepted the exoneration. Some investigators and experts argued that touch DNA is not definitive proof. Touch DNA can be transferred innocently. The underwear was brand new, purchased from a package. The clothing manufacturer, the person who packaged it, the store employee who handled it, any of these people could have left trace DNA that was then transferred to JonBenét. The same could be true of the long underwear. Touch DNA is incredibly sensitive. It can detect genetic material from a handshake, from handling an object, from secondary transfer. Just because unknown male DNA was found didn't necessarily mean that male was the killer. Moreover, other DNA evidence was less clear. There was DNA under JonBenét's fingernails, but it was a mixture and couldn't be definitively profiled. There were other genetic materials found at the scene that didn't match the unknown male profile. The crime scene had been so contaminated by the presence of multiple people on December 26th that isolating meaningful DNA evidence became extremely difficult. So while the unknown male DNA is a crucial clue, it's not the smoking gun that conclusively proves an intruder theory or disproves family involvement. In 2009, the Boulder Police Department took back control of the investigation from the DA's office. They made it clear they did not agree with the exoneration. They continued to view the case from multiple angles, including the possibility of family involvement. The DNA evidence was important, they acknowledged, but it wasn't the only evidence. The ransom note, the lack of forced entry, the behavior of the family, the staging of the scene, all of these elements remained suspicious to investigators who believed the parents were involved. John Ramsey, now in his 80s, has not given up. He has appeared in multiple documentaries over the years, most recently in 2024 productions that re-examined the case with fresh perspectives. He has consistently called for advanced DNA testing using genetic genealogy techniques like those that caught the Golden State Killer in 2018. He wants the unknown male DNA profile run through genealogical databases, family trees constructed, potential suspects identified. He believes this technology could finally solve the case. He believes it could identify JonBenét's real killer. The Boulder Police Department has been resistant to this approach. They argue that genetic genealogy is expensive, time-consuming, and requires DNA of sufficient quality and quantity. They say they're exploring all options but haven't committed to a genetic genealogy investigation. Some suspect the resistance is because police believe the DNA isn't from the killer, that it's a red herring, and that pursuing it would waste resources. Others believe the department is simply underfunded and overwhelmed, unable to dedicate the resources needed for such an intensive investigation. John Ramsey has also called for an outside agency to take over the case. He believes the Boulder Police Department is too invested in the theory of family guilt, too committed to decades of investigation in that direction, to objectively pursue other leads. He has requested that the Colorado Bureau of Investigation or the FBI take control. He has offered to pay for private DNA analysis. He has done everything a man proclaiming innocence could do, and yet questions remain. So what was John Ramsey really hiding for 28 years? If you believe the evidence, the DNA, and his consistent statements, the answer is nothing. He has maintained the same story since day one. He was asleep. He woke to his wife's scream. He found the ransom note. His daughter was missing. Then she was found dead. He believes an intruder entered their home on Christmas night. Someone who knew the layout. Someone who had access or knowledge. Someone who killed JonBenét and left DNA behind. He has never wavered from this account. He has submitted to interviews, polygraphs, DNA tests, media scrutiny, and public condemnation. He has buried his wife and watched his son suffer years of accusation. If he's hiding something, he has done so with a level of commitment and consistency that seems almost superhuman. But if you believe the behavioral evidence, the suspicions of trained investigators, and the statistical likelihood that someone in that house was responsible, then John Ramsey has been hiding the truth for 28 years. Perhaps he knows who really killed JonBenét. Perhaps he was directly involved. Perhaps he and Patsy made a terrible decision that night to protect something or someone, and they took that secret to their graves, or in John's case, continues to carry it. The public has been divided on this question for nearly 3 decades. What we know absolutely is this. On December 26, 1996, JonBenét Ramsey was found murdered in her family's home. No one has ever been arrested. No one has ever been charged. No one has ever been convicted. The case remains officially open, unsolved. A wound that has never healed for a family, a community, and a nation that watched it unfold. JonBenét would be 34 years old now. She would have graduated high school, maybe college. She might have had a career, a family of her own. Instead, her life ended at 6 years old in a cold basement room while Christmas lights still twinkled upstairs. Her murder has been discussed, analyzed, theorized, and sensationalized for 28 years. Her face, frozen in those pageant photos, has become one of the most recognizable images in true crime history. The case has raised profound questions about wealth and justice, about media coverage of crime, about the sexualization of children, about police competency, about prosecutorial discretion, and about the nature of truth itself. Can we ever really know what happened in that house? Can justice be served nearly 3 decades later? Can the truth emerge from layers of contaminated evidence, conflicting testimonies, and entrenched biases? John Ramsey believes it can. He is now 80 years old. He has spent more than half his life seeking answers and defending his innocence. He remarried in 2011 to a fashion designer named Jan Rousseau, trying to build a new life while carrying the weight of an unsolved murder and public suspicion. He speaks openly about the case now. He participates in documentaries. He gives interviews. He pushes for advanced DNA testing. He wants resolution before he dies. Some see this as the behavior of a man with nothing to hide, a man who has been wronged by a system that failed him and his family. Others see it as a man who has become so committed to a narrative that he can no longer separate truth from the story he's been telling for decades. The reality is, we may never know with absolute certainty unless new evidence emerges or someone confesses. What is certain is that this case has destroyed lives beyond JonBenét's. Patsy Ramsey died at 49. Her name never fully cleared in the eyes of the public. Burke Ramsey has lived his entire adult life under a cloud of suspicion, accused of involvement in his sister's death by internet sleuths and media specials. John Ramsey lost his daughter, his wife, his reputation, and his peace. Investigators who worked the case carry the burden of an unsolved child murder. The Boulder Police Department's reputation was damaged by the mishandling of the investigation. Even tangential figures in the case, like Bill McReynolds and the Ramseys' housekeeper, faced suspicion and scrutiny. And JonBenét herself has been reduced to a symbol, a mystery, a true crime obsession. We forget sometimes that she was a real child. She loved to perform. She loved her family. She was 6 years old with her whole life ahead of her. She deserves justice. She deserves truth. She deserves to be remembered as more than a mystery. If this case has taught us anything, it's that truth is elusive. Evidence can be interpreted multiple ways. Behavior can be misunderstood. And the justice system, for all its protocols and procedures, is run by humans who make mistakes, hold biases, and sometimes fail. The JonBenét Ramsey case is not just a mystery to be solved. It's a reminder of our limitations, our fallibility, and our desperate need for answers even when answers might not exist. John Ramsey continues to fight. He continues to speak. He continues to demand justice. Whether he has been hiding something for 28 years or has been telling the truth all along is a question that divides people to this day. What isn't in question is that a 6-year-old girl was murdered and her killer has never been held accountable. That is the real tragedy. That is the injustice that endures. If you found this investigation compelling, subscribe to True Crime Vault for more in-depth documentaries on cases that shaped criminal history. Hit that like button if you want to see more content like this, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe John Ramsey has been telling the truth, or do you think there's something he's been hiding all these years? What evidence do you find most convincing? These conversations matter. These cases deserve to be discussed with respect, examined with honesty, and pursued with the goal of justice. JonBenét Ramsey deserves that. Her family deserves that. And the truth, whatever it may be, deserves to finally be uncovered.